The problem is the government is dependent on foreign energy. And the government is dependent on this bailout from Russia. Mm-hmm. So the government went a direction that the people didn't want to go. And so that's how come you got the protests and the riots, the people in the street. And ultimately, Kiev was set on fire. And here's the situation I think that's important for us to recognize as Americans. It didn't have to be that way. We have ignored this region for the last 5 years. We've been completely uninvolved. And I think we have a problem in this country where politicians are afraid to talk about foreign policy. They're afraid to, because they don't want to be seen as entangling America in another foreign war. Nobody wants that. But there are certain values that we hold as Americans that we should be willing and able to articulate.
What does our president say?
What has our president?
Yes.
Oh, he's monitoring it very closely.
What does that mean? and he makes these threats that you better be careful.
In fact, he used the word "you better not cross the line."
Or what?
Yeah, and we heard that. We heard that in Syria.
How many lines were drawn in Syria? How many lines did we draw in Libya? I mean, it's just getting ridiculous.
It is, and when you say that we're monitoring the situation and we're working with all sides and we want a peaceful resolution. Look, all this is true. The question is, what position have you taken? Mm-hmm. Do you want Ukraine to align with the West? Do you want political modernization and reform? Do you want free economies? Do you want Ukraine to be free and independent, or do you want them to be basically an appendage of the Soviet bloc, which supposedly broke up, 20 years ago?
One of the things, by the way, and there's some other people on talk radio mentioning this angle as well. Glenn Beck comes to mind. Am I oversimplifying things when I say what's really going on here is Vladimir Putin is reassembling the former Soviet Union?
You're exactly right. And this is the danger in Ukraine right now. Look at what they did in Georgia in 2008. Georgia had its independence, but you have elements in Georgia that want to align more with Russia and less with Georgia. And so here come the Russians. They invade South Ossetia and Abkhazia inside Georgia. This was during the Olympics in 2008. And now they occupy Georgia. They've got 10,000 troops in Armenia. They're cutting off energy contracts with Azerbaijan. And of course, if you look over at the Baltics and Ukraine, they've cut off energy to Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and now Ukraine. They've done that in the past, and they've threatened to do it again. And when you do this in the Baltics, when you do it in Ukraine in the winter, people die. And when they said we're going to raise your price of energy, and this was in November of 2013, that means you're going to go through the winter with people not being able to get the energy resources they need. That means people will die.
One of the fascinating things I saw, and I think it was late Friday, maybe on Saturday, where the police were actually joining the protesters. That's a pivotal moment, and it sort of tells you what's really going on there.
Yeah. So Yanukovych, his party left him, and once his party left him, then the parliament voted. We're going to stop the police crackdown. They said they passed a bill saying we're going to stop the police crackdown, and we're going to bring our troops back. And of course, the troops abandoned the government grounds, and then the protesters just walked in, which is what leads us to where we are today. So, but here's the important thing: the political reforms that are going to happen in Ukraine are necessary. They're going to have an election. I think it's May 25th is the date they've declared their election. They're going to have. This is an important element to this. What you see when people get when you have these protests in the streets. It's usually from a centralized form of government where one person has way too much power. Mm-hmm. And one of the things the opposition wanted is they wanted the sharing of power with Parliament. They wanted a coalition government where you had the sharing of power with Parliament, not this one-size-fits-all centralized, government that is controlled by Vladimir Putin. By the way, Vladimir Putin's promise of $15 billion was dependent on who Yanukovych put as his parliament. Mm. So this is very clearly an effort by Russia to control their near abroad.
More from our guest. It's 7:50, 50 past the hour. Joined in studio by Congressman Jim Bridenstine. We're talking about Ukraine. And Jim, before we get on to some other topics here, real quick, what should the United States response be at this point?
So, I think what we have to do, a couple of things, man, there's not much time, but, if the International Monetary Fund has any value whatsoever, which is arguable and debatable, and certainly at times I think it has no value. But if it does, then here's an opportunity for us to encourage the IMF to provide the $15 billion that Russia promised to Ukraine, and of course Ukraine scuttled the agreement with the European Union. So look, Ukraine, its coffers are empty, its inflation is going crazy, the people are poor, and they've had their creditworthiness downgraded. What's going to happen if there's more and more mayhem in the Ukraine? They will align with Russia again.
Right.
And it is incumbent upon us to make sure that they align with the West. Now, the trade agreement with the European Union would be very, very valuable, far more valuable than the $15 billion. The question is, that's going to take time. So between now and then, we've got to do what's required to make sure they align with the West.
Are we currently supporting one side or the other?
We as a nation, it'd be hard to know by looking at the situation, the comments from the President of the United States. It should be very plain. We support freedom and independence for Ukraine. We believe that people have the right to set their own course. We believe they have the right to select their own governments. And we believe that the economic system ought not be controlled by Moscow.